All right, guys, did you start the first one? So just a reminder, when we do distance formula, you're just using Pythagorean theorem. You're finding the difference between the two x's and squaring that. And you're finding the difference between the two y's and squaring it. Adding them together, taking the square root. That's Pythagorean theorem. So for this one, you should get 9 squared plus 3 squared, which gives you square root 90. And then we will simplify that. We're not going to type it in our calculator and get an approximation. We're going to simplify it. So remember to square root 90, we pull out any perfect squares we could. So you can pull out square root of 9, which is 3, square root of 10. So that would be the simplified version of the distance between those 2 points. If you actually needed to know an approximation, you could type it in your calculator, but we, for this chapter, are going to want the radicals for the chapter we're about to start. And then the second part is the midpoint, which probably haven't seen for a very long time, but the midpoint is just the average of the numbers. So you average your x values, add those, divide by 2, average your y values, and you find the middle. So average the two x's, 5 plus negative 4, divide by 2, and then your y's, negative 2 plus negative 5, divide by 2, and you get 1/2, negative 7/2. Distance formula, midpoint formula. So we were reviewing those because it's going to show up in worksheets where you're going to say, man, I wish I knew the midpoint of these 2 points. And you're going to go, oh, I can find it because we reviewed it 2 days ago. All right? Or I wish I knew how long this segment was. Oh, wait, that would be the distance formula. It's not going to specifically say, use the distance formula. You just have to know to apply it. All right? I'm not going to do the second one. You can do that on your own time. Whatever we don't do together is part of your assignment. So we're going to go to number 3 through 11, and that's factoring. Do we remember how to factor it? It's been a while since we've done it. So factoring, there's different methods. I personally do guess and check. So the first question for number 3, I'm going to look at the trinomial. I'm going to look and see that both signs are positive. So I know that both signs are going to have to be positive when I factor it. And I know that my first term is x squared. So if I'm doing FOIL, to get x squared, I would have to do x multiplied by x. My last term is 9. So to get 9, I either do 9 times 1 or do 3 times 3. But then when I FOIL it all back together, my outside and my inside have to add up to be 6. So that tells me it's going to be 3 and 3. And then when you have the parentheses that are exactly the same, we're not going to leave it like that. How are we going to write it? I'm going to write it as x plus 3 squared. And then side note, this equation right here, x squared plus 6x plus 9 is called a perfect square trinomial. It's called a perfect square trinomial. And there's other things that we know from math that are called perfect squares. So we have an example of a perfect square. What? 400? Is that what you said? Yeah. Why is 400 called a perfect square? Because it's 20 squared. What's another perfect square? 64 is 8 squared. What's another perfect square? 9 is 3 squared. 49 is 7 squared. So they're called perfect squares because they come from something that is square. So this is called a perfect square trinomial because it comes from something that was square. X is 3 was squared. So that's why it's called a perfect square. And then in this form, it is a trinomial. The next one I want to factor together is number 10. And then the rest of them you can do on your own time. The next I want to factor together is number 10. So number 10 is a little bit different. What do we do first? Factor out your greatest common factor. You can still factor it, but it won't be factored all the way if you don't get out the GCF. So we're going to take out the number 2 by division. You put it in front. You get y squared minus 14y plus 49. And then I'm going to do guess and check. I know there's other methods. I'm doing guess and check. The y's will be the first. And then my last, I'm looking at my signs, and the last term is positive, which means both signs are the same. But since this is a subtraction, they both have to be subtraction there. And then what number is going to multiply together to give us 49, but add together to give us negative 14? 7. Minus 7 and minus 7. So I will simplify that and write it as 2 parentheses y minus 7 squared. Because it is a perfect square trinomial with a greatest common factor. Okay? Good so far? Good review? Your faces are not very friendly today. Okay. Next section, what must C equal to be a perfect square trinomial? All of these are in the form of a x squared plus bx plus c, and you can see where c is. What must C equal in number 12 to make that a perfect square trinomial? 64 is correct. How? How do you know? 16 divided by 2 squared. Do you know that from a former life, or no, a former course, or did you just figure out the divide by 2%? Okay. Because when we FOIL it back together, if this was factored, if that was 64 and this was factored, it would be 8 and 8. And when you FOIL that back together, you'll get 8x plus 8x, which is 16. Right? And then that's where we're getting 16 divided by 2 gives us the 8. And then that 8 times 8 in the last spot gives us the 64. So there is a formula. It is whatever's in the B spot. Take B, divide it by 2, and then square it. And that's what your C is. Yeah. But you don't need to memorize formula because it's like you can figure it out. But some of us need to memorize formula. Or different minds look alike. So I'm writing things down that might be helpful for you. So if I write b over 2 squared, maybe write that down too. And then I'm not going to do the next 2. You can do this on your own time. Just flip it over and go on the next question. So you will have time. My first bill, they had lots of time to work on this and get the computer thing I'm going to do today done. So you guys will have time. I'm just going through a few examples to get you started on it. The back page, which I totally renumbered wrong. Sorry, I totally meant to go back and renumber it, and it never happened. I forgot. Oops. We have to solve these equations by complete the square. We have not reviewed complete the square this year. We learned it in geometry. You reviewed it in Algebra 2. But you probably only learned it, like, used it this much in Algebra 2, so it's a lot. So I'm going to teach it from scratch. It's going to go kind of fast. Oh, we're making a video, so you can go watch the video later if I get to. And I may teach it different than your Algebra 2 taught it, than your teacher taught it. But if you can still do it, using different, like, it's going to be completely the square no matter what, but, like, you can still do it and not show the same shapes that I showed you. Goofy. That's okay. It may be helpful to write a couple of notes for what we did, and then also you're totally gonna run out of space. So if you are the person that can write really small and fit it, go for it. If you're the person that says, "Ooh, I'm just gonna need an extra sheet of paper," go ahead and get that out because you're totally gonna run out of space on number 5. Yeah. So what do we do? So we're gonna do 3, 4, 5, and part of 6. By the time I got to 5, people were totally out of space. So I said, I will warn all my other classes. Alright, so either write small or just get a separate piece of paper. So this is complete the square. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the C term, because that right now is not factorable with a perfect square trinomial right here. Can you see that that is not the correct C term? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of it. We'll move it to the other side. Subtract that to the other side. And when I rewrite what I have left over, I'm leaving a space where it used to be. And then I'm going to complete my square. So here I go. I'm completing it. Actually, I'm not completing it. I'm just putting the square there. Then I'll complete it. Okay. So I'm putting in my square. Now I'm going to complete my square. I put it in. Now I'm going to complete it. So the question is, what should C be? What should not C be, but like, what should C equal? What number should C equal to make this a perfect square trinomial? How'd you get 4? You did not do 4. You did negative 4 divided by 2, and you squared it. So you got negative 2 squared. There's a reason why I'm going through that step. And then that squared is 4. Now I'm allowed to do that because if I add something to one side of the equation and I go ahead and I put it on the other side of the equation, I can do whatever I want. So I'm going to do to both sides. So I purposely put that 4 in there to make this side a perfect square trinomial. So that's find C. And then my next step would be factor. So we're going to factor. This is a perfect square trinomial. So I know it's going to be something squared. Because it's a perfect square trinomial. My first term will be x. And then my second term is always what I had when I did b divided by 2, but before I squared it. Right now, that's easy to figure out, but eventually it might not be as easy. So when I look here, it's before I squared it. What number was right here? It goes here. So minus 2. And then on the other side, just add those two together. So I might make a note of that. This is b over 2b4 squared. That's what this is right here. So our goal is to solve this. We have to get x by itself. And we're peeling all the layers away of what's surrounding x until we get x by itself. What's the outermost layer I need to get rid of next to get x by itself? So how do I cancel out squared? And if I do square root, what else do I need to do? So I have to do square root, and I have to put a plus minus in front of that square root too. So now I have x minus 2 equals plus minus square root 2. Again, trying to get x by itself, what do I do now? I'm going to add 2. So since I'm adding 2, it does not go next to the radical. It is a separate term. Terms are separated by plus or minus signs. So I get 2 plus or minus square root 2. They do not go together. They are adding. And then with the square root, there's a positive or a negative symbol. Now x is by itself. How many answers do I have here? 2, so I'm going to put that in fancy brackets. Say more than one answer. So that is solving by complete the square. So once we got to where I have the green square roots, that's just solving. But the stuff above it was the complete the square part. Now it's very important. We're going to do 3 more examples of that, but it's so important you know how to complete the square because in this chapter, we're going to be using complete the square. Now, in previous courses, you could use complete the square to solve, or you could use factoring to solve, or you could use formula to solve. But the way we're going to be using it in this chapter is not solving. So I'm reviewing it with solving, but in this chapter it's going to be for a different purpose, so you can't do anything other than complete the square. So learn it, learn it, learn it. Okay? That'll make this chapter easy for you. All right, number 4. Again, write small. So the first thing that we're going to do, actually, let me stop talking for a moment. You see if you know the first couple steps, and then I'll jump in, and I know you're going to have questions. So don't take out your calculator. You won't need it, or you shouldn't need it, even though you're going to think you're going to need it. It's number 5 that's going to take up all that space. No, I said don't use your calculator. So then what is that? Don't use your calculator. Okay. What are you doing? 7 divided by 2 on the calculator? What is that? Oh, as a fraction. It's 7 over 2. Don't turn it into 3.5. It's 7 over 2. Doesn't even reduce. I'm sorry. So you move the negative 12 over, and I told you we're already going to have questions. So you do b over 2 squared. You're doing 7 over 2, and you say, oh, that's an odd number. It's not divisible by 2. I'll just leave it. Squared. So that means 7 over 2 multiplied by 7 over 2. And how do you multiply fractions? So we get 49 over 4. But when you go to factor for your next step, when you go to factor this as a perfect square trinomial, this is what I said on the first one. We'll have x, and then what goes in the second spot is whatever's right here before you squared it. Plus 7/2. Done. You just bring this number down. I did not need my calculator for that. Equal sign. Now, in order to add together anything in math, you have to have like terms. Are these both fractions? Okay, so I need to make them both fractions. There you go. Now they're both fractions. Are they like terms? What has to be like with fractions? Denominators. Anytime you add or subtract, you have to have common denominators. Because they like terms. I'm going to multiply this one by 4. So I will be adding together negative 48 fourths plus 49 fourths, which is 1 fourth. You should not use your calculator for this. Please practice without it so you become stronger. Now, we have squared equals a fourth. What am I going to do? Square root. And if I square root, I need that plus and minus. I have x plus 7 over 2 equals, I get to square root a fraction. What are the rules for square rooting a fraction? Square root of 1 and square root of 4. Square root of the top, square root of the bottom. Now I'm going to move that 7/2 over, and we have x equals negative 7/2 plus or minus 1/2. Is that my final answer? No. How about is your answer? Nope. This is not the answer. So this one doesn't have the square root left over, so I can actually add these together. I'll stop there. I can add them together. So I need to add together negative 7/2 plus 1/2, and I need to add together negative 7/2 minus 1/2. So that's negative 6/2 or negative 8/2, which is negative 3 or negative 4. Why did I write my negative 4 first? More negative. This is doable. Ready for the next one? If you sit there and watch the clock, it's not going to make it go any faster, just so you know. All right, what do you think we should do first? No. 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 Move that 9 over. Move a 9 over. You could put, there's another way you could do it, but I am going to keep it consistent. My very first step is going to be get rid of that C. That's my first step every single time, no matter what I'm doing. So, Wu Young, you could do what you were saying, but I'm not teaching it that way, okay? This is where it gets fun. Okay, so here's what's fun is, and this is why I said you're going to need room for this one. You can't do complete the square if there's a number here other than 1. That coefficient on the x squared has to be 1 or you can't do complete the square. So we have to factor it out of the first 3 terms, even though you don't know the third term. We're going to factor it out. So I'm going to take that 2, and I'm going to factor it out just like a GCF, like we did on the front page. And I'm going to write it here. So I'll have x squared left over, plus I will have 7/2 x, plus, but now, it's not going to be a box anymore. Because this is a box divided by 2 that goes in this spot. So you can either write box over 2, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to just change the shape. It's now fluffy cloud. Because it's different. It's not the box. It's now a fluffy cloud. On the other side, I still have 9 plus the box because I didn't change the box over there. This here is just a different number than goes in the box. This just means it's a different number. It doesn't have to be a fluffy cloud. You can make it a pretty hard one. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do complete the square with the fluffy cloud. So we're going to take the b value and divide it by 2 and square it with a fluffy cloud. Our b is 7/2. We're going to divide that by 2, and then we're going to square it. But instead of dividing by 2, multiply by its reciprocal. So I'm going to have 7/2 multiplied by 1/2, which is 7/4 squared. So what goes in fluffy cloud? 49/16. But on the other side is not 49/16. It's red square. So in order to find red square, we have to take that 2 and multiply it back in. So red square divided by 2 is fluffy cloud. To go backwards, we have to multiply it by 2. So I'm going to take 49/16, and this should be pretty easy to do. 49/16, I'm going to multiply it by 2, which is over 1. The 16 and the 2 reduce, and we get 49/8. So when you factor a number out, you will have a different number going over here, or you'll miss it. Our next step, please remember to bring down your 2. Our next step is to factor. Now the factoring should be easy if you follow the trick I've been giving you. We're going to have x here, and then what goes in this other spot is whatever you had before you squared it, plus 7/4. And then on the other side, we are going to have to make 9 into a fraction. We are have to find a common denominator. So I'm going to multiply the top and bottom by 8. I'm going to get 72/8 plus 49/8, which gives me 121/8. At this step, we have to solve for x. So you go peel off the layers. What is the layer I'm getting rid of next? I got to get rid of that 2. So we're going to divide by 2, but instead of dividing by 2, I could also multiply by its reciprocal 1/2. So I will have x plus 7/4 squared equals 121/16. I kind of like that number because what are we doing next? square rooting, and those are perfect squares. So we square root, we put plus minus in there. We get x plus 7/4 equals plus minus 11/4. So I move my 7/4 over, I get negative 7/4 plus minus 11/4. And there are no square roots, so I can go ahead and find the two answers, add those together. They already have common denominators. That is so convenient. So let's say you went through all this work and you're like, you know what, I'm not sure if this is the right answer or not. What could you do? How could you check it? Yeah, one at a time you could plug in the number 1 into the very original question, which does not look very hard to plug in 1, and see if it equals 0. And then you plug in negative 9/2, use calculator, plug it in, see if it equals 0. If they equal what that says to equal, then you've done it correctly. One more? You can make it through one more, right? Stop watching the clock. One more. Okay, I'm going to stop talking for a moment. I want you to do maybe the first 1 or 2 steps, and then I'm going to jump in and make sure that you're doing it right. Try the first couple steps. We've just done 3 of them. Because we're not dividing it for both sides of the equation, we're just doing it together. You could divide both sides by 5, but it's going to be, you're not going to be able to do that for what you're doing for solving, but not for what we're doing. So that's why I'm specifically telling you to do it this way. I'm going to use these are going to be okay. See, I'm not on my septic, and I know it's coming. Can read the future. That's not for some reason. I'll answer your question. What did you put in Puppy's box? Where did your 5 go? Okay, here's my 5. So I'm not dividing, I'm factoring it. I was looking at this one. Oh, okay, so you have it there, but in the step 3, it should show you the step. And that, oh, you just didn't write that step, that's how you just didn't write that step. So when you, when you factor out the, yeah, you need that step. You factor out the 5. Because what goes in here is going to be different than box over 5. So you guys have done the first couple steps, and then those of you that have questions, hopefully I'll answer your questions as they go through, and if not, just ask. So if you have questions, I'm going through from here. I got to fluffy cloud. I divided out the 5, and I didn't divide it. It's not gone. I'm just factoring it out, so I don't have to deal with it right now. You might be able to solve the equation by dividing both sides by 5, but that is not in any way going to help you do what we're going to be using complete the square for. We want that 5 there for complete the square for what's happening in the future, so don't get rid of it. Okay. So to get within fluffy cloud, I'm going to take 2/5, and I'm going to divide it by 2, and then I'm going to square it. So I'm going to take 2/5, multiply by half, and square it. So I have 2/5, or 2/10, reducing that 1/5 squared, because those 2's will cancel. So 1/5 squared is 1/25, but that's fluffy cloud. I divided the square by 5 to get that. So to get the square, I have to go backwards. I have to multiply by 5 now. So to get the square, that is 5 multiplied by 1/25, which reduces, and we get 1/5. So now I'm going to clean it up so it looks a little bit better. I've got my 5 outside of the parentheses. I'm going to factor this. So I'll have x plus, and then what goes in the second spot is what I had squared to go in fluffy cloud. And then over here, I'm going to have to add those together, so I'll find a common denominator. So we'll have -5/5 plus 1/5, which is -4/5. Question so far? Questions are to come. Stuff I haven't done yet. Oh, wait. If there's something you've missed along the way, please ask before I go on. Yeah. Right here? That's b/2, and then square it. So I did 2/5 divided by 2. Yeah. And then I did 2/5 times a half. So I got 1/5 when I multiplied 2/5 times a half. The 2's cancel. I got 1/5. And then I squared it. Okay. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to peel away the layers until I can get x by itself. The outermost layer is this 5. So I have to divide both sides by 5, which is the same thing as multiplying by its reciprocal, 1/5. So x plus 1/5 squared equals -4/25. My next step is square root. So when I square root, I have to have plus or minus. Is this your question?
Yeah.
Is it because there's a negative?
Yeah.
Do you remember what? It is I. So we'll have I, actually there's a number in front of it. We'll have plus or minus, and then we'll do 2/5 I. Because it's imaginary, it's not going to be a real answer, but we can still find the answer. It's not real. And then I'm going to subtract the 1/5 from both sides, and I'll have -1/5 plus or minus 2/5 I. To add these together, they have to be like terms. They're both fractions. They both have common denominators, but they are not like terms. Why? One of them is imaginary. The other one's real. You can't add real and imaginary answers together. That, with fancy brackets, is your final two. So that would be the final 2 answers there. So I'm going to stop talking, and you guys can work on any of that worksheet for 5 minutes or so, and then we're going to move on to our next activity.